Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Ruqaiyah Nabe, and I am invited here today by Sheikha Rema Yosef of al-rawiya Foundation. And I'm here today to talk about my spiritual journey and when I embraced Islam. Well, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background that I come from. I come from a Christian background. My father died when I was 2 years old, so my mother was both mother and father to me, and I am the eighth and the youngest of her eight children. I grew up in a home where I had to go to church, but interestingly enough, my mother is from South Carolina, so she was a Southern Baptist, and later on she became a devotee at a church called Elmendorf, which is a Dutch Reformed church, and it is the oldest church in Harlem. I was born in the village of Harlem on the island of Manhattan in New York City, US of A. And even though my mother took us to a Baptist church, I was curious about the other churches in the neighborhood. So one of the first churches that I started investigating was an apostolic church across the street from us. And it was a big avenue, and I wasn't supposed to cross that avenue. But they used to drum and sing and dance and beat tambourines, and that kind of sparked my curiosity. So I would sneak over and stand in the doorway, and after a while I started calling my friends to come with me, and none of our parents knew that we were going inside that church once one of the sisters came and said, children, come in, come in. So we would go in, and unlike the Baptist church, there you had to do what they call tarrying. And you had to get on your knees and you had to keep saying Jesus over and over and over and over again until you began to speak in tongues. That was what they tried to get you to do, to speak in tongues. And then we had Bible lessons and all of that. So by the time summertime came, we used to sneak over to that church a lot. Now, I must have been about 9 at that time. And before that, my mother had taken me to the Catholic church to have me baptized there because she wanted me to go to Catholic school. My father was a native New Yorker, and he was from a Catholic family. So she figured it would be better for me to go to Catholic school rather than public school. But that didn't happen. I ended up going to public school. So I was baptized in that Catholic church when I was about 4 or 5, just before it's time to go to school. And then, because I frequented the apostolic church, they began to ask me if I wanted to be baptized. So I went home and asked my mother, and she said, absolutely not. When you're 12 years old, I will be baptizing you in the Baptist church. That's the age when you would be baptized in the Baptist church. So I said, well, can I go back to the church across the street? So she said, go ahead. So I went back across. And when I went back across, I guess they assumed that I came back to be baptized. So they put me in a white gown. Now, this was a storefront church, and it was very, very different from the Catholic church, because the Catholic churches are always big and imposing, and they can be big and imposing in the poorest neighborhoods. So I go to this little storefront church, and I don't see anything that looks like I could be baptized, because I know in the Christian church you have to be submerged in water. So all of a sudden, this little place over on the side in the church, just before you get to the pulpit, was a big square piece, and it had cloth over it. And then all of a sudden, these sisters dressed me in this white gown, and they took the cloth off this place that I thought was a table, and they picked up this door that was on it and latched it to the wall and then filled it with water. And then I realized it was like a big vat or a big tub or something like that. And I had to climb this little ladder and step down into the water. And then the elder of the church baptized me and submerged me. And when I went home, my hair was wet and it had puffed up into a big afro because, then we used the straightening comb. And my mother said, "Where have you been and what did you do?" I said, "Elder Till across the street baptized me," and she was furious. So about 3 years later, she took me to the Baptist church, as she said she would. And this was one of those big Baptist church with a preacher, who was quite supported by the congregation. And there, I kind of knew what to suspect, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. So the big pulpit in the church had a sliding door, and it slid back, and it was filled with water, and it was like a pool. So this time, I didn't climb this little step ladder and step into a vat. I was taken down into the pool by these sisters. And here again, I had the white gown, and the reverend said something, and he said some prayers, and then he submerged me. So by the time I'm 12 years old, I'm baptized in 3 different Christian denominations. By the time I'm 16, I refused to go to church anymore. I am a child of the 60s. I am a child of the civil rights period. I am a child of the Black is Beautiful period. The last time my mother gave me money to buy my Easter outfit, that by then I could shop on my own, I went to Greenwich Village and I bought an outfit unlike anything that you would wear to church. And when I got back home, it was, "What is this? What are you doing with this? Take it back." And I told her, "I'm not going to church anymore." So I started exploring, and I went all around the neighborhood. There was a Russian Orthodox church, there was a Black synagogue, there was a white synagogue. There were other fundamentalist churches like the Pentecostals. There was the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Salvation Army. All of these churches were in the neighborhood. And not only were there a lot of churches in the neighborhood, but there were a lot of different races and ethnicities in that Harlem neighborhood where I grew up. So I was exposed to all of these Christian denominations, all of these different races. And then I started venturing out of the neighborhood into the community. And I went to an African Theological Center. I investigated Islam via then the Black Muslims, and then they became the Nation of Islam. I went to places where Malcolm X spoke, and sometimes I looked for Malcolm X. He was not there. And Elijah Muhammad spoke, but I realized that the reason why Malcolm X was doing all the speaking is because he was the voice for Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was not the most glib speaker. And I don't know if I ever really contemplated joining the nation. I think when I heard Elijah Muhammad speak, that kind of sealed the deal for me that, no, this is not what I'm looking for. So I ended up embracing Islam and taking my Shahada at the International Muslim Society. And I stayed there for a period of 9 years. I learned from different teachers, but they were all men. And I'm going to say right now, before I forget to say it, how happy I am that the Sheikha Rayma Yosef is teaching the classes that she's teaching, because they were not available to me and sisters like me when we embraced Islam. For me, I embraced Islam in my teens, and there were older women in the church, but they were not the teachers. And there are some things that women need to teach women. But more than that, I'm happy about these classes because the information that we're getting in these classes is information that was not available to us. It was available to the men. And leadership positions were not available to us. It was only available to the men. And so we were allowed to learn but so much. And we were told we had to be good women. And we didn't know those things in the Quran that are available to us today because they were not emphasized. They were not emphasized at all. And even if we read them, of course, we were reading it in English and we were reading the Arabic via transliteration. There was always something put there to say, yes, but it doesn't mean this, it means that. So it always ended up being to the advantage of the males. And so it got to a point for me, I was the type of person who was considered, I was the woman who was considered rebellious because I asked too many questions and I protested. And quite often the sisters would ask me to speak for them. When we would go to the imam with a question, most of the time in reference to men and how the men were treating us, they would just have these grievances and talk and so forth and so on. And then when we get in front of the imam, they wouldn't speak. They would say, Sister Ruqaiyah, tell him. Sister Ruqaiyah, tell him. So we would tell him these things. And one day he said, well, sisters, you have to understand. You know, the brothers, there's different brothers, and the brothers are, you know, they're like birds. You have eagles, you have peacocks, you have hawks, and you have this kind and that kind and the other. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, and you have buzzards. and he said, Sister Ruqaiyah, don't speak that way. That's not nice. I said, well, it's true. If you have beautiful birds, you have bad, ugly birds also, you know. And so I was always getting into trouble. Eventually, I left that community and I started just exploring the same way that I had explored when I was younger. And I looked at the Hindus and I looked at the Buddhists, and people started saying to me, why don't you become a Buddhist? Well, why don't you come over here? Not the Hare Krishnas, but, you know, if I went to study yoga, then they would start telling me, you know, what chants I could say and something like that. And then I said, no. I did not want to leave the Islam that I had embraced. But I was still trying to find out where I could go and be me and be comfortable. And it took me a long time to get back. It was a long journey back. And when I went to One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, it was because a Muslim sister who I had met at the nursing home where my mother was in her last years came to me and she said, I want you to come to my graduation. And I said, oh, what is this? So she said, come, you'll see. So at that time, the graduation was at St. John the Divine in New York City. And that was 2004. And when I finished that graduation, I started to weep. And it felt like my whole body, my whole soul was talking to me, because it was almost as if I had clear audience, as if something was saying to me, this is what you've been looking for. And I had no idea. Interfaith seminary, what am I doing here? And so I applied, and I had these mixed emotions, these very torn emotions. How am I going to fit there? I'm Muslim. What is this all about? And on the one hand, I was hoping that they would call me and accept me. And on the other hand, it was like, well, maybe this is not what I should do. But I did it. And at that graduation, when I said, this is what you've been looking for, I said, 2 years later, you're going to be up there where those graduates are. That's just what came to me and came over me. And one thing I have to remember also, my teacher from Malaysia used to say to me all the time, you will teach women. And I was very, very young at that time. He said, you will teach women. I almost forgot about that. And because I was rebellious at that time, he used to call me Ruqaiyah the windy. He used to say, you're like the wind. First it's quiet and soft, and then all of a sudden, gush, He says, I don't know. What am I going to do with you? Well, anyway, so I finished this interfaith class. And the first year, it's a 2-year program. The first year, I'm saying, what am I doing here? And what am I going to, why am I here? But I found out that there were a lot of other people in the classroom who was asking the same question. And then I realized towards the end of the first year that having been a nurse and an adjunct professor, I said, wait a minute, these are ministries, because ministry is service. So I have been serving. I have been serving the sick, and I have been serving young people who come to me at conference hour with problems other than academia. Probably problems that related to their academia, that may have gotten in the way in some ways. But it was all kinds of situations. A woman whose daughter was, violated and ended up with HIV and all sorts of stuff. And having to really encourage these people, these young people, to stick with it, and finish school. So I figured out, well, if I was called to do this kind of work, if this is the kind of vocation that I'm supposed to involve myself in, then I have really been doing it already. Okay. So the second year, I'm saying, but what am I going to do when I finish? And then towards the end of that second year, there was a demonstration for spiritual counseling. And the whole class, I thought it was just going to be a demonstration. But one of our classmates volunteered to be in the fishbowl environment. And she talked about some real stuff. And she talked about some things that made her cry. And then we started crying, and we were dabbing with the tissues and snotting and blowing. And I said, that looks interesting. Maybe that could be a part of my ministry. I still wanted to teach, and I was not yet ready to retire or take a semi-retirement from nursing. So I started learning more about this spiritual counseling, and I decided to go for another 2 years and take the spiritual counseling. And so things just started opening up in an interesting kind of way, because here I am trying to find my way back to Islam. and how I can learn more, and how, because my learning was interrupted. I was doing very well in my classes, in my Arabic classes, excelling, doing better than all the brothers who were in my class. I was the first woman in their class. But it was interrupted. And it's a regret that I have that I didn't continue in that path. But I decided, okay, so I'm never going to be an imam. Women are not imams. How am I going to take what I know, what I've learned, learn more, and be in a spiritual leadership position? Well, I can do this via interfaith, because I will not only learn more for the faith of my choice, I will learn more about others. And then, with things going on in the world the way they are today, and so many people in so many nations fighting because of religion, maybe there's something that I can do to help bring people together and still be authentically who I am and who I choose to be. So, after the first year of this spiritual counseling, which is my third year at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary, I heard of a multi-faith program, a doctoral multi-faith program at New York Theological Seminary. And I'm like, I can learn more. And at the same time, I could get a doctorate degree. And this was a pilot program at a Christian seminary. And I'm here again asking myself, am I going to fit in? Who's going to be there, etc. And when I get there the second year of the pilot, and there's more than double the amount of people who started the first year of the pilot. And they were all Christians. And there was one who was a Unitarian Universalist. And we were kind of like the oddballs amongst the group of Christians, because what we both found was that even though they had opted to come into a multi-faith program, they were not able to really step outside of their comfort zones. And so I kind of became a channel there to say, you're in a multi-faith program. There are certain things that you're going to have to be cognizant of when you have someone else in your midst. Otherwise, you shouldn't be in a multi-faith program. And so I got through the doctoral program, and it turns out that when I graduated in 2010, it was the 110th year of New York Theological Seminary. And I and another Muslim woman who had told me about the program were the first two women, Muslim women, I have to emphasize, the first two Muslim women to earn a Doctor of Ministry degree anywhere. And we were the first two Muslim women to graduate from New York Theological Seminary in its 110-year history. In addition to that, I did my doctoral degree on spiritual direction, which is a form of counseling, spiritual counseling. And I was the first Muslim woman to do a doctoral degree in spiritual direction. But I want to emphasize that when I studied at One Spirit, that program is an interspiritual program. So I was prepared to be able to offer my services to people of all faiths and all spiritual practices. I leave no one out. So I am there for my Muslim sisters and brothers, but I reach out to others as well. And one of the things that concerned me, having gone through 2001, September 11th, was how would I be accepted as a Muslim woman who's offering spiritual counseling to people of all faiths and spiritual practices? But it turned out to be quite interesting because there were a few people who refused to be a part of my project. And I have no way of knowing if it was because I'm Muslim. But everybody else who became a part of my project were just open-armed, and they embraced me. I embraced them. There was never a matter of my trying to convert them trying to convert me. And through that process, we found out our commonalities. So now I am in a position where I can go out and I can speak. And what's most important to me at this point in my life is that I can, quote unquote, defend Islam and the misconceptions and the misinterpretations and the stereotypes, not only of Islam, but also of women in Islam. And quite often, I'm also kind of asked by the non-Muslim community, I thought women could not be spiritual leaders in Islam. What is this whole business of interfaith? What is all that? And I say, well, I tell them the same thing that I tell the Muslims who are not open to what I'm doing at this point in my life. I say, even though during the days of prophecy, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam appointed women in spiritual leadership positions, even though he had women who were scribes and women who, his own wife, Aisha, knew the hadith more than any man. The men used to go to her. Why can I not be in a leadership position? But because at this time it's not available to me necessarily through Islam, then I'm doing it based on the option that presented itself to me. So I'm very happy with the choice that I made because it gives me a lot of flexibility. It gives me an opportunity to reach a lot of people. It gives me the opportunity to discuss with people, teach people, present to people that we have a lot of commonalities as well as differences. And if we start to focus on our commonalities, we probably will get along a lot better. And that might be a simplistic way of looking at it, but it's a start because we have to start somewhere. We cannot all believe that we are one under God. For those of us, I have to emphasize, who believe in God. Not everybody believes in God. Some people are agnostics and question the existence of God. But for those of us who believe that we are all one, then we have to stop allowing our faiths and religion to get in our way. So all along the way, I think I mentioned I come from humble beginnings. I managed to go to nursing school. I managed to, I guess, get all the degrees that there are to get. But it doesn't matter so much about the degrees that you get. It matters about what you learn and what you can share with others. And to remember, for me, it's always to remember, I always pray to be humble, to stay with a sense of humility, and to be able to share and to serve. Because for me, if I'm serving others, I'm serving Allah, because that's what I'm supposed to do. And it's been a long journey for me. I have more years behind me now than I may have in front of me, unless I live to be a very, very old lady. And I also want to remind people that I am a village elder at this point, not a senior citizen. And I'm not an old lady, a village elder. Anyway, and also we have to keep a sense of humor. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a sense of humor. We have to stop all of this fire and brimstone and all of this, you will go to hell if you don't do this and hell if you don't do that. We have to find the compassion of Allah, the compassion of God. The Holy Quran starts each chapter with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the Basmalah, the compassion of Allah. There's only one chapter that doesn't start with that, and that's only because it is the next chapter is a continuation of the preceding chapter. So if we remember compassion, then and if we remember that Allah is compassionate with us, then we can be compassionate with others. And Allah wants us to be compassionate with ourselves as well. So there's so much more that I could talk about regarding my journey. Probably a lot of things that I'm not remembering right now, but I know that it has been with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I'm sitting here today. I am who I am today. I am what I am today, all because of Allah and whoever He brought into my life to help me along the way, because we don't do anything by ourselves. I don't know if there's much more for me to say at this point, because I am feeling very full at this moment. Full and also empty, ready to be filled with more. Did I mention how happy I am that the Sheikha is doing these courses? Did I mention that? I did mention that. I am so thrilled about it. I really am. Because I wish someone like her was available to me when I was a young woman learning to become a Muslim. And I'm thrilled with these courses, because it's giving me so much more, and it's making my life richer. And I now feel like I can be available, not only young women, to women, because a lot of women who might be my age still may not know what there is to know. And I can share that with them. I'm so happy about that. So I'm going to end here for now. I don't know if this will continue, but I think I've talked enough. Thank you. Shukran.